No, I think we've been watching with some interest the program on the western slope of Colorado, to which I went down and observed with Dixie Lee Ray, who was on the first Atomic Energy Commission chairwoman, and quite a remarkable person. She was also governor of Washington, a real gal, real strong person. And we were in an airplane. I was in an airplane with her and with John Love, who I think was governor of Colorado at the time. And we flew over that when it detonated. It gives you an idea what it can do to the surface. And I began to have a word of doubts. Then the doubts grew as Wagon Wheel took shape, in that it was not going to be one detonation like Rio Blanco was. It was going to be 5 nuclear weapons, one beneath the other in the same hole, each detonated at sequences to do a massive fracturing. So that began, of course, the study of, well, is this worth doing, or isn't it?
After World War II, we suddenly had, as a nation, this atomic energy, which we were trying to grapple with. How we had seen very clearly the destructive forces of it. We were now trying to figure out if there was another use for this energy. And the outgrowth of that was the government starting a program known as Project Plowshare to try to come up with peaceful uses for this atomic energy.
They were going to use it to dig harbors and irrigation ditches and all that kind of stuff. And can you imagine the kind of radiation you would have had with it?
They wanted to dig canals, for example, using nuclear weapons. And the idea was you simply go out and you line these things up, you set them off, and you don't have to move the earth. You know, the nuclear weapons move the earth for you.
Where present land travel is awkward, costly, time-consuming, and dangerous, excavating mountain passes for highways and railroads. Where water navigation is thwarted by imposing barriers of earth, excavating canals. Where commerce is stifled by forbidding shorelines, excavating harbors. For the diversion of water, cutting channels of great width and depth to carry water to areas of need. This is the peaceful potential of nuclear explosives that the United States is developing for all mankind. In the program it calls Plowshare.
And it was being pushed by the boys at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. It's where the idea came up. Mm-hmm. And then El Paso, you know, had all these leases here on the mesa.
This is what the formation looks like at ground zero under the pressure of some 8,500 feet of Battlement Mesa formations above it. The gray sections are Mesa Verde sandstone, and the black portions are shale, which sandwich the sandstone and thus entrap the natural gas. The conventional way to release such entrapped gas is to break up the formation by shattering it with nitroglycerin or to open fractures with liquid under pressure. The Atomic Energy Commission believes a nuclear explosive will prove far cheaper and a great deal more efficient.
Nuclear stimulation was designed to recover natural gas from tight rock and sandstone formations. Nuclear stimulation was a commercial use of nuclear explosives and a perfect match for the Atomic Energy Commission's Plowshare program.
The argument from El Paso and the AEC was, just let us go ahead with this experiment so we can see if it will work, and then we'll have the technique if we need it in the future.
On the 10th of December, 1967, in northern New Mexico, with relatively little fanfare, El Paso Natural Gas Company and the Atomic Energy Commission detonated the first warhead designed for nuclear stimulation in what they termed Project Gas Buggy. Consisting of a single 29-kiloton nuclear explosive detonated at a depth of 4,200 feet, Gas Buggy was declared a success, as it apparently did produce some natural gas from the tight formations in New Mexico. The AEC set its sights north to Project Rulison.
This is how the device is expected to stimulate gas production in the Rulison field. The energy released by the nuclear explosion will melt and vaporize nearby rock and will fracture the rock beyond to a diameter of about 740 feet. A spherical cavity of about 160 feet in diameter will be created in about 1/10 of a second, or in about the time the shock wave rebounds from the surface. As the cavity cools, the vaporized and melted rock will collect in a puddle at the bottom, and most of the radioactivity will be entrapped here as it solidifies. Sometime after the explosion, the roof of the cavity will collapse progressively upward, forming a chimney of broken rock to a height of about 370 feet above the point of detonation. Government experts say the fractures beyond the cavity area are expected to provide flow channels for some of the gas trapped in the surrounding rock. The chimney will act as a chamber where the gas will collect, to be drawn off through a well drilled back into the chimney.
I can't remember what they said about gas buggy, but from Rulison they had not used any of the gas that they had produced.
The next nuclear stimulation blast was not conducted until May 17, 1973 in Rio Blanco County, Colorado.
I'm imagining you on that plane now flying over and looking at the test on the western slope.
Yeah.
Well, did you have a pretty open mind at that point about it?
Yes, I think so, because there were spokesmen there from El Paso, one from El Paso Natural Gas. There were a couple there from Atomic Energy Commission that had done the work in getting it put together. Explained what they were using by way of load. I've forgotten now.
Where Gas Buggy and Rulison used a single detonation, Project Rio Blanco would use 3 33-kiloton nuclear explosives detonated simultaneously at various depths in a single wellbore. Colorado's Governor John Love originally expressed some hesitation about nuclear stimulation, stating in January of 1973 that he was considering vetoing the Rio Blanco project.
And there had been a lot of unanticipated effects, even as a result of those smaller explosions. But the AEC, you know, they had X amount of funding for Atoms for Peace, Project Plowshare, and they were going to, by God, use their whole budget whether it made sense or not.
There had been announcements about the Wagon Wheel Stimulation Project clear back in the late 60s.
El Paso Natural Gas would bring Phil Randolph, who was their public relations man, up here to discuss how benign a technology this was, and to discuss how little it would impact the local people. And he was kind of a slick, scientifically oriented gentleman. And the more Phil Randolph talked, the more pissed off the people in Pinedale got. It was wonderful.
You didn't have an argument till you went to a meeting in Big Piney.
The cattlemen had a meeting down at Big Piney, and there were in excess of 1,000 people that attended this because they were going to discuss this Wagon Wheel project.
We were pretty upset because the field, of course, that they really wanted to, the El Paso field that they wanted to try it on was the Wagon Wheel, of course, which is, you know where it is.
Yeah, it's
Just south, it's on the Big Piney cutoff.
El Paso's Project Wagon Wheel was located 19 miles south of Pinedale. Development on the field had been attempted and failed several times since the 1930s, but Project Wagon Wheel would have been the first to attempt to free the gas using nuclear stimulation.
El Paso Natural Gas was not an outsider in this way. In 1953 or 4, the Union Pacific Railroad, over which I've had an ambivalence between love and hate all of my life since I was a 2 or 3-year-old kid. When you're raised in Rock Springs, that's how it is. The Union Pacific Railroad ceased the burning of coal and its prime movers for the entire system and put in diesel fuel. Lovely, new, fancy-looking rigs. And that put about 3,500 men out of work in Wyoming. And Rock Springs was a pretty sick town there for about 1 year. And the people say, well, when are they going to roll up these sidewalks? Where do we go from here, and that sort of talk. And up comes a little outfit called El Paso Natural Gas, and the first thing you know, there are 40, 45 people getting jobs driving trucks and going out south, building some wells, another 40 or 50 people employed out in Northwest. And all of a sudden, by God, we saw something else in Southwest Wyoming was going to keep us alive, not just the damn coal. Yeah. And El Paso became a welcome citizen and stayed that way a long, long time.
If Wagon Wheel was successful and the Sublette County field could be developed, the potential gas was estimated to be a substantial portion of the U.S. supply and worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Wagon Wheel was going to be 5 100-kiloton devices, something like that, sequentially fired.
As a scientist, I would have been fascinated to see something like this. You know, you have all the theories, and then you think, aha, now suppose we had, instead of just one detonation going on, we had 5 sequentially, a minute apart or something like. What would happen then? And
While the AEC and El Paso originally proposed Wagon Wheel in 1969, the project wasn't set for several years, and local opposition remained mostly dormant. In 1971, a student at the University of Wyoming named Lee Nellis spearheaded the Take a Look program.
there was a proposal that came out of, I think it was the Adult Education Office, the University of Wyoming. Lee Nellis was the instigator of it, talking about the program was Take a Look at Your Community. The office at the university would help you set up a program so that you could look at the various things that were affecting your community.
In 1971, Sally Mackey was a librarian in Pinedale, Wyoming. That fall, she contacted Lee Nellis, requesting Pinedale as a location of the next Take a Look meeting.
And so we worked out a program with this group and set up the Take a Look program, and we invited all the government agencies that were in Pinedale. At the time, I think the Forest Service, the Bureau of or the BLM rather, the Soil Conservation Service, the Game and Fish, and well, let's see, we invited the county officials, the town officials, and I can't give you all the specifics on the program that we set up, but as we were preparing this program about that time, there had been announcements about the Wagon Wheel Stimulation project.
In January of 1972, the Atomic Energy Commission issued its draft environmental impact statement for the Wagon Wheel, and the timing coincided with the Take a Look program scheduled for February in Pinedale. Mackey requested copies of the environmental statement from Wyoming's U.S. Congressman Tino Roncalio.
When we had this public meeting scheduled, we got him to send, I think maybe something like 24 or more, so that we could spread them around.
Rarely a night would go by that we didn't have a phone call 9 or 10 o'clock at night, sometimes after midnight. Somebody in Wyoming who might not be aware of the time difference would call, and my mom hated this, but my dad would indulge them and sit there and talk to them for 10 or 20 minutes. And then the next morning get up and go to his office.
Well, it was pretty hard to keep from being contacted. I was a congressman, you know, with 25 letters a day or 125, I don't know what it was there. But there was a great interest in this.
The draft environmental statement helped encourage others to take a look and get involved. Among them was a Boulder, Wyoming cattle rancher named Floyd Bousman, who would eventually become one of the chairpeople and de facto spokesman of the Wagon Wheel Information Committee.
But it disturbed me an awful lot, mainly because of our dam at Boulder Lake that we just finished building. Mm-hmm. And in their impact statement, they put a value on that dam of $150,000, and it cost in excess of $500,000.
And as I say, we tried and tried and tried, and we finally got Lawrence Livermore Laboratories finally put out a study, and we did not get it in the usual manner. It was sent to us by somebody who, actually kind of a secret thing, they just shipped us a copy of this, and that was where we found out that they had us, our lives were evaluated at about 250 to 300,000. There were so few of us.
Sally Mackey, Doris Spurzlander, and Mary Ann Steele were all very outspoken women that were not afraid to give their opinion. And that's in such stark contrast to so many women in that time period. And they knew what they were talking about, and they were very well versed at it.
No, I went down and talked Ken Perry into the fact that he ought to be, I went down and said, aren't you concerned? And he said, yes, he was. And so the two of us got very concerned. And then we discovered there were other people in the area that were also concerned, and we all kind of just came together.
A young man named John Perry Barlow also became a member of the Wagon Wheel Information Committee.
I didn't actually share the general superstition about nuclear power because I had worked part-time while in college at a nuclear power plant in Connecticut.
Well, you hated that thing.
No, I didn't.
You used to have nightmares about that nuclear bomb up there.
No.
I suppose there were about 40 people from around the community that attended this meeting and voted to investigate further the nuclear gas stimulation proposal. And that's really where this group evolved.
After that, it was decided that the Wagon Wheel Information Committee would be set up, and the whole thing got rolling.
It was an amazing group of people from all kinds of businesses, educators, teachers, businessmen, ranchers, professional people, ministers. I mean, it was a real diverse, cohesive group.
We came up with the name the Wagon Wheel Information Committee because although we had a lot of reservations about the project and were quite alarmed when you really started studying the proposal, we wanted to call it a group that was a study group and was trying to, and we actually were trying to study all aspects of it. And that's how we really got started on it.
I don't know that I've ever seen grassroots, sort of spontaneous grassroots opposition to something get so well organized and so effective in such a short time.
We constantly worked. We did research. We put things together. You know, we wrote letters. We made phone calls. We spent a million hours on the telephone. We spoke at public meetings. We made presentations at all sorts of places. The work was ongoing.
We had a real publicity crew. Phyllis Burr was here at the time, and she was working for the Roundup part of the time. And then my daughter, Susan Mackey, she was getting out press releases.
Although the committee was originally founded to research the project, it would eventually become its primary opposition.
I'm just saying, what could go wrong?
So as you got to know more about it, what seemed to you to be the biggest problems with it?
Well, the biggest problem to me was the idea that we might be polluting one of the major aquifers of the West with radioactive isotopes that would be around for about 300,000 years.
Water radiation was something that I've noted here, but in rereading this, that was also left unanswered. And God, that's all we need to do is mess up the headwaters of the Green River and take care of millions and millions of people downstream.
Well, it was a scary thing. If they let that thing go loose down in there in the aquifer, we had a problem forever.
As we studied the environmental impact statement, then we were aware of the possible consequences.
The gas, of course, would be radioactive.
And the idea was that when they piped the gas into gas lines, into pipelines, that they would pipe other gas in, and the radioactive elements would be diluted. So hopefully you wouldn't get a dose.
They wanted to flare the gas for a year. And it was going to drop out all that tritium, cesium-137, and so forth and so on the people that live downwind.
If my recollection is correct, they made statements, for example, to the effect that people living downwind should not really use the milk from their cows.
And of course, when a cow grazes on the grass that has had iodine-131 drifting down on it, the cow concentrates that radioactive isotope in the milk. And then when the kid drinks the milk...
And it becomes a cumulative thing, and then either in the beef or in the milk, it can be transferred to humans. And since this is a cattle-raising country, and the people depend on their livelihood. From that, it seemed like an awful risk to take.
No, it wasn't the issue of nuclear power. I think it was the issue of bombs, bursting 5 of those bombs in one hole that close to each other, and trying to tell me on my ranch 5 miles from that I'm not going to suffer any damage from that goddamn stuff. How can you tell me that? What proof you got that that's when we didn't have the proof? That was a tough question to answer for them.
It would hurt a lot of wells, crack a lot of chimneys and basements if there were such, ruin a lot of bridges, irrigation ditches, possibly dams. And they did say that it probably would ruin the bridge across the East Fork and the Boulder Bridge. That's our only in and out of this place. Mail, all of our supplies.
Not only were those people so arrogant that they hadn't even really figured out what structures were likely to be damaged, that were there to be damaged. They didn't know that water's worth anything. And they said, oh, well, if you're worried about the dam, we'll drain it. Like an acre-foot of water isn't the most precious thing there is around here to a rancher in the summertime. Just run that water on down the river, then fill it up again when we're done.
And I remember someone saying something about it would just bring up an awful lot of Texans and they would destroy the ecosystem of the desert out there because they'd be running back and forth in all their pickup trucks. So he wasn't concerned about the nuclear thing at all. He was concerned about all these Texans and their pickup trucks.
It just seemed kind of boneheaded.
Well, it was boneheaded, but then why they didn't see it, I don't know.
The committee was not alone in their criticism of the draft environmental statement. The Wyoming Game and Fish was exceptionally critical of the study, noting several errors and the use of outdated and inadequate information. Game and Fish questioned why the environmental statement recommended domestic cattle to be dry-fed, but assessed no risk for grass-eating wildlife, such as deer, antelope, and elk local to the area. Despite the committee's efforts and widespread criticism, the AEC issued its final environmental statement on Wagon Wheel 2 months later, in April of 1972.
Another thing that made me mad about it, and I thought was dishonest, you'll notice if you compare the 2 impact statements, the draft statement tells about all this tritium and whatnot that'll fall out on us. We won't be able to drink the milk from our own milk cows. We won't be able to eat our meat and how it goes through the food chain and all this stuff. And then there's no answer or explanation in the final impact statement. They just completely ignore that section. Just took it out.
I don't remember when we took to separate branches.
Big Natural Gas Company was not necessarily, that was not automatically considered to be evil incarnate. I mean, for one thing, at those days, a lot of people in Sublette County worked for El Paso Natural Gas.
Governor Stan Hathaway was for it, and so was Thyra Thompson, who was the Secretary of State.
Well, that's the next question I was going to ask you. What was the statewide response to this? This was not just a Sublette County issue.
Not near as vigorously opposed to it as you found in that area.
Their first proposal or press release talked about the wonderful economic development for this area. And of course there were local residents who were very much in favor.
They thought they were going to make a pile of money out of that thing. There were several at Big Piney that were for it, because they always supported whatever the oil patch wanted to do down there. They had that mentality.
Probably 15, 20 families in the southwestern part of the county here that were for it. And I kind of know where they was coming from. Oil and gas has been paying for their schools and projects down in that end of the county for years and years. There were several from Big Piney ranchers that were for the project that flew down there. And I sat right next to Joe Budd when they blew it off. And I got kidding old Joe, and I said, well, what do you think about it? He said, well, I'm for it. It blew off and lifted old Joe about that high off the ground. You just see the earth roll. It was quite an experience. And I said, Well, what do you think of it now, Joe? He was just white as a sheet. He couldn't say a thing. No comment.
You can't say the county was 100% united, but there were so many more people that took our point of view, especially after we got to presenting what the ins and outs of this.
Even with the publication of the final environmental statement, the spring and summer of 1972 would bring some positive news for the Wagon Wheel Information Committee. Senator Cliff Hansen stated that he had been assured by El Paso's own representative, Dr. Philip Randolph, that if the people of Sublette County did not want the Wagon Wheel blast, it would not occur.
This is where I remember coming in. They had Mr. Randolph come and talk to this pretty large gathering of interested people and made the comment in his little speech, little whatever, and so he made the statement that, you know, if the people of Sublette County don't want this, we're not going to do it. And that was what I took away from that meeting, that if we could prove to him or anybody else that the people of Sublette County did not want this, then we had him on his word. He wasn't going to do it.
We tried to get an official referendum on the ballot, and at that time, there was no legal mechanism to do so.
And we wanted to hold a poll, a straw vote of all the people in the county, how they felt about Wagon Wheel.
In the absence of any legal mechanism to do this, we figured that what we could do is just put up sort of private polling places outside of the public polling places.
And that was election year, and so we volunteered and took all of the polling places in the county and strictly adhered to all the rules and regulations, stayed back.
They required us to conduct our straw poll at least 50 feet away from the polling places.
But we stopped everybody that went in and told them what we were doing and do as they chose, either vote or not vote, or, you know.
I'm sure Sally has this figured, but it was a fairly high percentage of people who voted in the one election who also voted in the other.
And Sally and I took on Calpet. And we sat from 7 to 7 to get 21 voters. That's all the votes at Calpet. The interesting thing is, and I think that Bernie and somebody took Northwest Pipeline, and of course they had a lot more people. But the interesting thing was that all of our people either were oil company employees, worked for the oil industry in some way. Our entire ballot was yeses. They were against it.
We had all the ministers in Sublette County count the votes.
The result was overwhelming.
When the results of the straw poll came back, they showed that 970 people voted against the project and only 279 voted in favor.
And the straw poll clearly showed that overwhelmingly the people were against the project.
It didn't take long for El Paso to balk on its earlier promise. When questioned at a press conference on November 30th, 1972, Dr. Randolph replied, "A small group of people in Sublette County have distributed large amounts of erroneous information and conducted a premature straw poll. We do not feel the poll accurately reflects the feelings of the citizens of Sublette County." With Dr. Randolph reversing his earlier promise, Floyd Bousman wrote a letter to Senator Hansen.
When we got through talking to Cliff about this and made our case, he agreed that we were entitled to have a hearing back in Washington about this thing with the El Paso Natural Gas Company, Atomic Energy Commission, and everybody that was involved.
Within a couple of weeks, Senator Hansen had arranged a meeting in Washington, D.C. to allow the Information Committee to present their case to the AEC.
We right on, in the beginning, contacted our congressional delegation, which was Cliff Hansen, Gail McGee, and Tino Roncalio. And those three gentlemen did us a very fine job. All three of them, they did a wonderful job for it.
Well, at first the congressional delegation was not very helpful, but I think gradually they started to see that there was a lot of popular sentiment that was starting to gather itself around us.
I feel that we got a great deal of help. I think Tino Roncalio was especially effective.
Tino was always very easy to reach and to express our concerns. Our two senators weren't quite that approachable, I guess you might say, but I think because of some of the people on the committee who were so persistent and didn't take no, that we got a lot of attention that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Tino Roncalli was always sort of a happy-go-lucky guy. I mean, he was the guy who really, I think, gave more help, to the people up here, and I think that Tino's heart was in the right place.
One of the things he used to say quite often when I was a kid, and I didn't understand it until years later, was that there's nothing greater you can do on this earth than help other people. All the fame and fortune, money, property, prestige doesn't mean a thing if you can't drop what you're doing and help somebody else once in a while.
I was trying to hit it every way I could, from the appropriations for the money, because it was all being funded by AEC.
Right.
Now, of course, there is no more AEC, as you know. They abolished the commission and they abolished the joint committee also.
We had a lot of help from Tino Roncalio. He was real good. And I did not remember that Hansen did anything, but Floyd said Hansen did get pretty active after he found out that the oil people themselves, a lot of these oil companies here, were not happy about it. And of course, Hansen's constituency was ranchers. I mean, we're the ones that put Hansen in, the ranch community, and he always got a lot of votes from Pinedale.
Hansen, I never had that much contact with Hansen.
I mean, he was certainly a gentleman, and he certainly spent time with us, and he certainly listened. Where it went from there, I don't know. I really don't.
I was kind of afraid of him because he was a Republican and we were Democrats, but the truth is my dad and Cliff got along pretty well. The changes that Cliff Hansen and my father made to the 1920 Mining Mineral Tax Act resulted in literally billions of dollars flowing back to the state of Wyoming.
Senator Cliff Hansen was known as an oil man in Wyoming and was much more open to Wagon Wheel initially. However, he listened to his constituents, sending out a survey even before the Information Committee conducted their straw poll to gauge public opinion. And it was Hansen who organized the Washington, D.C. trip for the Wagon Wheel Committee.
Well, there is no way we could have gone to Washington and made the same case without the community being behind us. Not at all.
The Information Committee hosted a fundraiser they called the Wagon Wheel Blast.
The Wagon Wheel Blast that they had in town. They had a town-wide party, wide open, swinging party. And all the proceeds went to sending the 11 of us to Washington to fight the powers that be.
On December 9th, 1972, every bar in Pinedale, all three of them, participated in the Wagon Wheel Blast with live music in each bar and a catered breakfast. Admission was $1, and even though the local temperature in Pinedale was -9 degrees, the event was very successful.
I met ladies in the bar that night that don't drink and never, little old ladies that had never in their whole lives been in a bar, turned out to go to those parties and contribute because they felt that this was a good cause.
At the start of 1973, there had been 2 nuclear stimulation projects already conducted. Gas Buggy in New Mexico in 1967 and Project Rulison in Colorado in 1969. Project Rio Blanco was scheduled for the late spring of 1973, but Colorado's Governor John Love had recently stated that he would possibly veto the project. The Information Committee spent the beginning of 1973 getting ready for their trip to Washington.
It was a well-rounded group. We had young people the age of John Perry Barlow. Christmans and Swifts went.
I did know the Swifts. I do remember Sally very well. She and Phelps cared deeply about this Wagon Wheel Information Committee. The ranch they had was out in Boulder, and they went to Washington with the Christmans, and they paid their own way to go.
The 2 couples. And then it was Phyllis Burr, who worked for the Roundup here for quite a while, and she knew her way around in television and stuff, and she's the one that got Floyd on television back in Washington.
I don't really know why Phyllis came to this country, but she was a real asset, and she was involved in everything, and she had a personality that wouldn't stop.
There was Sally and Bernie Gosar.
I wouldn't have been able to go on my own dime. I have a lot of little children at home, and so it would have taken quite a bit. But I do believe Sally Swift bought the ticket for me. And so I went then.
Daphne and Floyd and Ken Perry and Phyllis and I went in Ken's plane. And then Marianne Steele, and we took A.B. Cooper went with us. He was a council person, and he went with us.
But the 11 of us that went on the money that was raised through the contributions felt an obligation to do the best job we could of presenting the case.
To prepare, the committee created a 66-page document titled Statement of Opposition to Project Wagon Wheel.
We wanted to take as a professional-looking document as we could, and we did it all on the copy machine. We had various people writing up different aspects.
People who helped on the committee, not the 11 of us, but little old housewives, little old ladies, they came in a line that formed out in our lawn.
Different people ran them off for us, gave us the paper to put them together.
I think we figured we'd have to have 100 copies of it, and that was a heck of a lot of Xerox.
We put them together on Sally's big table.
We did our collating. We had piles that went all the way around the dining room table, the kitchen table, back into the bedroom, and back around.
And they marched through, and they each picked up one page, and when they got done, they had one booklet, and they laid that one booklet down, and one lady was sitting there putting the covers on them, and then she put it on the pile, and that went on, I think, for 2 days.
Then we thought, well, the finishing touch will be those brass fasteners, and we put those on. And we took a suitcase, well, 2 suitcases full of those back to Washington.
The statement of opposition contained the results of the straw poll, as well as the committee's objections to the project, along with source materials and letters from scientists and government agencies that agreed with the committee and opposed the project. The Washington, D.C. agenda began on Monday, February 5th, with a luncheon hosted by Congressman Tino Roncalio and attended by the 2 Wyoming senators, Cliff Hansen and Gail McGee. The luncheon was followed by a meeting with representatives from the Environmental Protection Agency, then a meeting with the Department of the Interior and a Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. On Tuesday, Phyllis Burr arranged for Floyd Bousman, the chairman of the Wagon Wheel Information Committee, to debate Philip Randolph of El Paso Natural Gas.
Phyllis Burr made some telephone calls, and she set up this Today thing for me to debate it with Phil Randolph, who was going to be in charge of this Wagon Wheel shop.
Phil Randolph was, he was the main mouthpiece for El Paso, and he was, I gotta say, like a parody of your mealy-mouthed corporate tool.
It was pretty short. But I think I come across more as telling the truth than Phil did. And I did. I quoted out of the goddamn impact statement a lot,
Floyd came out looking like Henry Fonda, and Mr. Randolph came out looking like a used car salesman, and that did us a lot of good. I mean, a million people saw Floyd come off really good.
After the Today Show, the group met with the Bureau of Land Management and then with an official from the President's Council on Environmental Quality. Later on Tuesday, the committee met with Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture.
His Secretary of Agriculture was also supposedly an expert on energy. And really, a meeting with him lasted about 45 minutes. I really enjoyed visiting with him.
We met with him, and he was real smart.
We handed him one of these brochures, and it was quite thick. It was about a half-inch thick. And it looked quite nice. It was typed. They were run off on a Xerox machine, but they had been.
Statement of opposition?
It was a statement of opposition, and it had this real good-looking cover. And he says, and how much federal money went into the publication of this?
I suppose, how many government dollars did you get, like in a grant or something, to put this together? And boy, I tell you, we fairly well flew at him.
And we rose up as 11 of us together, and we said, not one single penny. And we said, let us tell you that there is this is how we made this booklet. And everything in there is hand done. And Earl Butz, at the end of it, he was kind of bemused by the whole business.
Our original reason for going out there was to meet with the head of the head of the AEC, who was James Schlesinger.
Well, interestingly enough, he was replaced about 3 days before we got to Washington, and Dixie Lee Ray, who became governor of Washington State, was the head of it. And she refused to meet with us. She didn't have any problem. She hadn't promised us nothing.
Despite this last-minute schedule change, the final meeting was productive.
This was in Washington in a Senate hearing room. We'd asked Cliff Hansen to chair the meeting, and we started off by making El Paso Natural Gas Company real mad.
Well, Cliff Hansen was the oil man senator, and we kind of worried about that. You know, we thought, how really sincere is Cliff going to be? Well, Cliff did us a lot of good. He knew the ins and the outs, and he served his constituents.
And Cliff Hansen, when we asked him to chair the meeting, we asked him if he would ask El Paso to dispense with a big long lecture about an energy crisis, because we were well aware that there's an energy crisis. So there's no argument or difference of opinion there.
He rose up that last day that we were there in Washington, and the head of the president of the El Paso Natural Gas Company had a great big long speech all prepared.
They wanted to use up all the time that was allotted lecturing us about an energy crisis.
So with their prepared presentation.
Yeah.
Cliff got up and he said, before my people even say their pieces, I want you to know one thing, gentlemen. We're not contesting the fact that there's an energy crunch. These people aren't contesting that there's an energy crunch. His speech that he was clutching in his hand was totally invalid. I mean, he couldn't get up after Cliff Hansen said that. We weren't arguing that there was an energy crunch. We were just questioning one technology, and there was an alternate that worked better. Why didn't they use that?
There was one time when Floyd kind of took over, and the president of El Paso got up to say something, and Floyd said, "Sit down, I'm not finished." We didn't follow all the proper protocol.
At any rate, we had our string of witnesses. Ken Perry made a real good presentation, and I think Doris and Sally and Mary Ann Steele, and we all had a part of it. John Perry Barlow went too.
Talk about the use of the effective and somewhat cynical use of theater. We knew that the best thing we could do was portray ourselves as a bunch of hapless hicks.
We got to talking about this Price-Anderson Act, and just a week before, somebody had sent us a clipping out of a newspaper down at Rifle, Colorado, where some guy had a motel down there and was damaged by that experiment. They settled it out of court. Well, I was questioning the general counsel for the Atomic Energy Commission, and he made the statement that there had been no claims of any kind. And I whipped that copy of that out of my pocket and read it, and he stuttered and stammered about that for a long time.
Overall, the delegation represented the committee well in Washington and came home feeling good about the trip.
We couldn't have done that without all that months and months and months and months of preparation here. We couldn't have done that. We couldn't have made the presentation we did had we not done all this terrific amount of work ahead of time. You know, there we were looking them right in the eye. President of the El Paso Natural Gas Company, those men have high positions, they're executives. They didn't speak any better than some of us.
We had some real good meetings back there, and I have felt good about it really ever since. I mean, the way everybody conducted themselves and the things we had to say we could back up.
In the Washington meeting, we met with technical people from the AEC. The technical people were there from El Paso. We presented our case. I don't think that they were that impressed. I just don't. I think that the whole thing hinged on Rio Blanco.
After everybody left the meeting, there was these notepads that were on the table, and I thought, souvenir for the kids. So I picked them up. And they were just left there, and I figured it was okay to do that. And one of them had some writing in it. And I should remember the quote, because I said it often enough. And this was Gail McGee's group of people. And the comment was, in so many words, These are people who think they can make a difference, I wish we could have had another meeting after that, because I would have made that one score too.
When we went back to Washington, I think that we were looked at, I think we were regarded, particularly by Senator McGee's office, as a real pain in the ass.
It wasn't important really that we were there to try to do something. We thought we were going to do something, and we were exercising what our democracy tells us is citizens' participation, and they just looked down on it. So that's the worst memory I have.
Do you remember the visit of this Pinedale committee?
I have to be honest with you, and it's been too many years.
Sure.
It's one of those, there was stuff going on there all the time, one thing or another.
Governor Love of Colorado also visited D.C. in February to meet with President Nixon. Shortly after returning to Colorado, Love announced that he would not veto Project Rio Blanco, and a detonation occurred on May 17, 1973. 2 months after the Rio Blanco detonation, Love stepped down as Colorado's governor to accept a position as energy czar in Nixon's administration.
When they did the shot, the governor cavilled him. He didn't use his veto power, and so they did the one down there at, I forget whether it was Rulison or Rio Blanco. Floyd would tell you which one.
The Rio Blanco shot, a test down in Colorado, western Colorado towards Meekum. So they invited people from Pinedale to go, but nobody on the Wagon Wheel committee were allowed. They didn't want us. But we had become real well acquainted with the boys at Lawrence Laboratory in California, at Lawrence Livermore. And they invited us.
And we decided, by God, we just take them up on it. And Ken Perry had a big old twin-engine plane, and he flew us all down, most of the committee down with the exception of Floyd. And Floyd drove down, and why I don't know, but it worked out great because we had his car to go down and take pictures after the explosion.
They had a tour bus that they took all these people that were, and they had these guys giving the spiel. Oh, I guess it was reporters.
Well, we actually couldn't see the thing. And we was up there, we was to get the effects of it all. And we'd been toured of where it was at, the little creek run by it, the old schoolhouse and things like that. And there was gonna be no damage. And we was to witness before, and then we was to witness after. Well, here we were sitting there, about 300 of us on our rear ends, and you could see this thing coming. It was almost instantaneous. And I'd say it lifted me off the ground that much.
Right after the shot, as soon as it went off, there was a waiting period while they cleared the road. As soon as they were cleared, we took off.
Floyd and I was the only two that kind of jumped the gun. We weren't supposed to, and went down and took pictures.
Well, about a mile away from the shot, there was an old historic rock schoolhouse. Well, when we got there, there's an engineering company from Grand Junction that's bringing out of the building all the bracing, planks, timbers. They had that thing braced on the inside like you wouldn't believe. We watched them take it out and put it on their truck and drove off.
Well, they had beams all the way around it, and then cabled the beams into it to keep it from shaking or moving. And I was surprised it still didn't cave in, but it didn't.
About 30 minutes later, here comes the El Paso bus with some Pinedale people.
When the tour bus got there, Floyd and those guys were standing there, and they watched the bus disgorge all these people, and they hear the tours. Now, see, nothing happened to this nice little historical building. And Floyd said no, and they never mentioned the fact that they had wrapped it 3 times around with all these cables and padding and propped it up with boards and done all this stuff to keep it from getting cracked, and they had taken all that down before the tour bus got there, see?
They said, see, it didn't hurt the schoolhouse at all. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's deceptive.
We caught him in the act, yes.
The first disappointments came, I think, when it became obvious that the chimney, they called it, that is created by the detonation, doesn't remain open. It's so hot that it melts almost everything, any form of limestone or other structure that's in the Earth's crust. and thereby it defeats the purpose for which it is intended, and that is to keep the fissures open so that the natural gas can come in off these little stratigraphic traps and be recovered and put to good use. That began the big disappointment of the thing.
It was a very gradual evolution over to the point where they had enough people who were willing to think that we could stop it.
Well, I think most people thought you couldn't stop it, but they were sure for you doing it.
The first hope that Project Wagon Wheel might be canceled came in April of 1973, when the newly appointed head of the AEC, Dixie Lee Ray, declared the project was dead as a doornail. However, in 1974, Wagon Wheel was still on the AEC agenda. In fact, the Atomic Energy Commission was still pursuing field-wide development using nuclear stimulation. The AEC also continued to conduct tests to develop a sequential firing method.
You know, they'll say things to you and you make you feel good while you're there, and then you look and say, oh, that's what they really thought? No.
The overwhelming local attitude was, well, it sucks, but there's nothing we can do about it. That nobody liked it very much, but that it was inevitable.
Dixie Lee Ray and the AEC requested $107.6 million for up to 30 nuclear stimulation projects in Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah.
If the government really is going to go ahead with something like that, they will give you a sugar-coated pill and tell you they're going to help you out in every way they can, but basically they simply do it. It's what it is just a form of condemnation.
Dixie Lee Ray attempted to harmonize her statement and the AEC plans for further development, stating that Wagon Wheel was dead as a doornail for 1975, but that the AEC still believed nuclear stimulation had the potential to add significant natural gas reserves to the current U.S. supply. Shortly after Dixie Lee Ray's reversal, Roncalio attempted to defund the AEC's entire plowshare program, but this was defeated on the House floor. The following month, Senator McGee, backed by Senator Hansen, passed an amendment through a Senate subcommittee that would ban the Atomic Energy Commission from detonating any future atomic blasts underground for the purpose of stimulating natural gas.
I wish I could tell you when the decision was made, and by whom to do away with it, to abolish it, to abandon it.
It's one of those things where the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I don't think there is a definitive answer as to why Wagon Wheel didn't happen.
I kind of feel it all just sort of peaked. And then people started becoming more involved with their own interests.
So after that, things just they just finally gave up on it.
The plowshare program was never officially canceled. However, the program received no further funds for fiscal year 1976, and the AEC quietly shelved Project Wagon Wheel.
If we'd been the first project, it would have been a lot different.
And in fact, I think it would have taken place. I think if Rio Blanco had been a success, they certainly would have had the shot up here.
They would have irradiated us if we hadn't done anything. There was no. I mean, we fought and fought and
drilled and everything.
Yeah, we delayed and delayed and delayed. We caused them to delay until the facts came in from Rulison and Rio Blanco. The technique does not work.
I think showing that a small community could get together and fight the federal government or any other agency that was doing harm to our community, and I think we done one hell of a job.
Well, I think it's one of the most remarkable things I ever heard of. I knew it was going on. I figured they didn't have a chance of a snowball in hell.
I think that it showed that the people can make themselves heard.
Actually, we're one of the few grassroots groups that ever prevailed.
The Atomic Energy Commission itself was abolished in October of 1974, or more correctly, absorbed into a newly created Energy Research and Development Agency, which eventually became part of the United States Department of Energy.
The coloring indicates that we will strike the appropriate balance between energy and environment, and we will keep the sky blue and the grass green.
They learned how to do the kind of environmental studies that can't be torn up by a bunch of local characters.
One of the biggest things that happened, though, was that people became aware of the possibility that environmental issues were something that you could care about even if you were local.
Unsure if Wagon Wheel was permanently canceled or waiting for a similar project that might require their efforts, the Wagon Wheel Information Committee continued to meet annually to keep its incorporation until 2006.
Stars, and we'll sleep in my car. Once this fire dies down, our silhouettes are on the trees. There's a cool mountain breeze, the faint glow of our town. We're telling stories of old, of the miners and their gold, cowboys and Indians too. Tomorrow, or we could just not go, and I'll stay here with you. Life out here may be rough, but I think we've got the stuff to make home here one day. Say goodbye to our town where we'll seldom be found once we're out here to stay. Can we move out here now, buy an ox and a plow, and build a cabin for 3? Keep our dogs and our horse in the woods to the north, where they'll be wild and free. But they'll come when we call, every springtime or fall, and come right back home. 'Cause even the beast that's as wild as me, well, he can't always roam. We may not have a lot, but we'll love what we've got. It's all that we'll need. We'll be pleasant and proud, and we'll be singing aloud of the life that we lead. Life out here may be rough, but I think we've got the stuff to make home here one day. Say goodbye to our town where we'll seldom be found once we're out here to stay.